Alternative medicine is our topic today. We've already done alternative medicine like 3 times. The topic today is the Rebbe's Shita in alternative medicine specifically. If you've attended the medical ethics lectures, you've already seen the halachic dimension, when we can do alternative medicine and when maybe we should not, what sort of questions to ask when an alternative medicine procedure is on the table. We did that already. What we didn't do is we didn't cover the Rebbe's Igros, the Rebbe's letters, and the Rebbe's talks that cover alternative medicine. So that was the goal for today. But given that we ended up doing such a good job on alternative medicine in general, and given that I can't resist farbrenging with you, I've already told you about half of these letters as well, which means this is not going to take us as long as I had thought. I'd planned on an hour-long talk with the Rebbe's Shita on alternative medicine, and now I honestly have only about 30 minutes worth of things to talk to you about the Rebbe's Shita on alternative medicine. However, some people asked yesterday or the day before if we could also do a talk on the Rebbe's Shita on the halachic position as well, just generally how a Jew views smartphone use, internet use, especially among our youth. So I figured I'd throw that in as a bonus and do the second 30 minutes just on that. So we're doing a combined lecture. We're going to do 30 minutes of alternative medicine and 30 minutes ruining smartphones for you forever. And that's the plan, okay? And you know, if neither of them take 30 minutes, then I'll just stand up here and answer your questions until I run away to prepare that final shir. The truth is that shir's ready, but the slides are not pretty, and I demand pretty slides. You deserve them. You deserve nice slides. So I need an hour to put pretty slides together. I have to connect my computer. All right. Was that, he doesn't need the microphone? I know. It's for dramatic effect. It doesn't need to be on. No, it's not about the microphone. It's about the fact that for dramatic effect, I can pause, look at you, lean in, and talk like this. It's really just for the effect. It doesn't even need to be on. It's a tool. It's a prop. It's a prop. There's not even anything in this cup. Everything's a prop. There was water in that cup. Okay. The first letter I want to show you is a theme that we have been reviewing again and again. I think we've literally given every lecture on it. At some point, I think every time I've been up here, I've repeated this general idea, but I haven't shown you this version of it yet. It's just the Rebbe saying one of the Rebbe's main ideas again and again and again, and I hope you do take this home with you, because this is the way that a Jew goes through life, and that is that God runs the world. It's very important to recognize that God runs the world. The Rebbe frequently refers to God as Borei Olam u'Manhigay, the creator of the world and its driver, the one running things. It's not enough to believe that God made the world. It is required upon us, incumbent upon us, to believe that God is actively running the world at all times. Regarding medicine, this is a very important point. Cures do not come from doctors. I say this as someone who has made his living in biomedicine. My entire full-time job is working in biomedicine. I help develop the things that ultimately become medicines, and I'm telling you from that position, God heals, God makes medicines, people don't do anything. What people do is people make kalim. God asks, please help me hide in nature. Please help me make a dir b'tachtenim, a dwelling place for me in this world. Please go through the motions of being somebody who is normal and going to a doctor, but don't believe in it. It's not where healing comes from. Healing comes from God and nowhere else. The Rebbe says this so many times, but this is one of them. So, before we get into the discussion of alternative medicine, I will say a lot of the reason why people choose alternative medicine instead of conventional allopathic Western medicine is because they don't necessarily have the trust in God that they should, and that is a bad reason to choose alternative medicine. There are many good reasons to choose it. That's the wrong one. Meaning, if you believe for some reason that God could only cure you through your herbalist and could not cure you through your allopathic doctor, then you don't believe in God. We believe God could cure you through anything, including a banana. God can cure you through anything. So there are many good reasons to choose what form of medicine works best for you, including side effects, including what you pay with your feet, including what sort of institutions you want to support, including what kinds of people you're comfortable interacting with. 1,000 good reasons to choose different kinds of medical approaches. The worst one is the most common one. I don't believe the other ones work. I believe anything works if it's a plausible keli and God wants to send a refuah and God wants to send a cure. So with that in mind, I want to show you an opening letter about doctors not healing, a refrain from the Rebbe. I'll read it in the English. I translated this one, I think, so we're safe. When a Jew, male or female, feels unwell and they call the doctor. Let me scroll up so you can maybe follow the Hebrew. Do any of you who still has their original? Really? You made it all the way through? There should be a special prize for the 4 people who made it all the way through with their hard copies. 5. I'm not blaming those of you who did it. I'm just impressed with those of you who did. That's nobody on this side, right? No, you threw it away on day 1. I know it's in your Seamus pile from Sunday, but they still have it. They have it. When a Jew, male or female, feels unwell and they call the doctor, the intent is not that the doctor will do what he pleases. That's not the idea. People get this wrong. The intent is not that the doctor will do what he pleases. Rather, the idea is that God chose that doctor as his shliach, as his emissary, to carry out a mission through him. I mean, we do not believe doctors cure. We believe doctors are a vessel through which God acts. And when there is trust in God, without any doubts that He, that's God, drives the world, we merit to then see this also with physical eyes at every step. We see how God holds each of us by the hand, and directs us in the way that is best for us, physically and spiritually. See, you can tell I translated, there's typos. Therefore, if you go to the hospital according to the instructions of the doctor, you are still in God's territory. This letter was written in response to somebody who said to the Rebbe, I'm afraid to leave God's territory and move into the doctor's territory. I want a faith heal. I want to sit in my home, say Tillim, and trust in God. And the Rebbe says back, going to the doctor the right way isn't leaving God's territory, and it's no different than saying Tillim. As a matter of fact, it's what God prefers if you do it with the right mindset. God wants people to make Kalim. He doesn't want people to believe in Kalim. The belief that somehow I went from saying Tillim in my house, and that was when I was holy, to going to the doctor's office, and that's when I gave in, is a mindset. People who decide they're done with relying on God and ready to turn to the doctor, yeah, they've left God's rishus. Yeah, that's not how a Jew acts. Yeah, that is inappropriate. Somebody who says, my next step in my divine service, I did part one, which was saying Tillim, and now my next step in my divine service is going to the doctor because God says so and because I trust that God sends a cure through this doctor. Someone who sees it that way has only gone to the next level of their divine service. They haven't stepped outside of spirituality. Sometimes I'll hear people say, I did the spiritual route and the physical route, right? I said Tillim, I asked for a refuah shlema, I wrote to the Rebbe, I went to the oil. Now it's on the spiritual side, and on the physical side I went to the doctor. The Rebbe doesn't see it that way. It's all the Torah side. The Torah spiritual holy side is all of those things together. It's not separate. So therefore, if you go to the hospital according to the instructions of the doctor, you're still in God's territory. You haven't switched from being spiritual to being pragmatic. You're still being spiritual. It's a matter of mindset. God will protect you and ensure that all goes according to what is best for the health of your body and soul. So step one, when we have the discussion about what form of medicine to pick, what doctor to go to, is to remember that as long as it keeps the rules of halacha, as long as it keeps the rules of plausibility, which we're about to explain, as long as it follows the Rebbe's broad guidelines, you're always in God's territory no matter what intervention you pick, and then it's just a matter of preference. You get to choose what color you wore today, you get to choose what kind of car you drive, you get to choose what kind of doctor you go to as long as it doesn't violate Jewish law. But the belief that somehow we're getting ahead by overthinking the keli, by overthinking the hishtadlus, is a classic mistake that Jews have made throughout the ages and has never borne fruit. We make a basic keli and we trust in God. You get to choose your keli, and if you're interested in the keli of alternative medicine, let me give you the parameters. These are the parameters to choose a healthy keli of alternative medicine. We have anybody who is a naturopath or is into naturopathy? Herbs and stuff. I ate my veggies. I had a cucumber this morning. I'm into it too. I'm just kidding. No, there is such a thing as naturopathy. The thing that I've told you before about naturopathy and about herbal medicine in general, I mentioned it in a previous year, but I want to repeat it here just for your safety. This is a safety note. Herbal medicine is one of the alternative medicines that is real. Now, I know that's a little insulting to other alternative medicine techniques, but it's important to note medicines that come from plants have real chemicals in them. A lot of those chemicals are the same chemicals that are used in regular laboratories to make drugs. Probably the most famous, or at least the most broad, I don't know if I can really say most broad or most famous. Let's do something a little bit less. Among the most broad and most famous cancer therapies right now is Taxols. Derived from paclitaxel. I think that's the main one, paclitaxel, but they're Taxols. They are a synthetic chemical made in a laboratory, but they're derived from tree bark. We discovered this in tree bark, synthesized it in the lab, and we use that same chemical to treat cancer patients. It's a chemotherapy, which tells you that there's something very potent in some tree barks. This is not a joke. And because this is not a joke, it is very important if you're interested in taking any kind of herbal supplement, whether it is one that seems serious or doesn't seem serious, that you speak with whatever doctor is giving you other medication and tell them what you're taking. Because since these medicines are real, they can have terrible interactions with very simple drugs. You can take an herbal medication, take a Tylenol, and God forbid get very badly hurt because these two chemicals don't work together. They're poisonous when they're next to each other, which simply means that a keli for refuah and a keli for safety, the basic halacha which requires us to mitigate risk, is that if I'm taking an herbal medicine, I'm telling anyone who's involved in my medical care that I'm taking an herbal medicine. Let them know. All doctors in every field, whether they're on the alternative side or the allopathic side, have a way of looking up whether things should interact negatively, and it's one of our responsibilities as halachic Jews, as Jews who follow Judaism, to mitigate risk. Mitigate risk means I don't put plants in my body without checking what else I'm putting in my body, because these things are incredibly potent. Okay, that's it. That was your general PSA. Be careful with plants because they're real. You don't have to be as careful. I don't want to insult anybody, but I will say homeopathy, which the actual homeopathy, not the broad discussion of homeopathy. Literal homeopathy is where you take something and dilute it in water so many times that chemically speaking there's nothing in there anymore. The theory of homeopathy is that the water remembers the echo of what was once there, but chemically speaking, you cannot detect any of this in the water. Therefore, you do not have to check if there's a negative drug interaction with homeopathy. There's no chemical in there. But with plants, there is a chemical in there, so you got to be more careful. Okay. Naturopathy. Regarding a naturopathic doctor, the Rebbe writes, in the year 1967, give or take, of Tes Elul. Regarding a naturopathic doctor, it depends on what we know about his success rate. One simple question the Rebbe has. Not, does the medicine work? Not, what do the doctors have to say about it? Not, is your local doctor angry that you're going to the naturopath? One question. I want to know if it's working. And that is going to be part of it. We're going to build the shita here. This isn't the whole thing, obviously. Wouldn't it be great if that was the end? And that's the one letter from the Rebbe on alternative medicine. Thank you all very much. No, that's one piece of a shita. But one piece I wanted to bring you is one thing the Rebbe asks repeatedly when it comes to any medical technique, alternative or otherwise, is it working? Something in medicine, in regular medicine that we call, is it effective? What's the efficacy? So the Rebbe wants to know about efficacy. And this doesn't mean the Rebbe's not asking, did it pass an FDA clinical trial? The Rebbe's asking, does it have efficacy data? Does it have anecdotal rates of success? What can you tell me about whether they're good at what they do? Because different people are slinging different herbs, and I want to know whether this herb slinger is doing it right. The Rebbe is, do we have any chiropractors in the room? Anybody who has gone to a chiropractor? Keep your hand up if it was a good experience. Oh, the hand stayed up. Okay, I'll tell you this. The Rebbe's letters on chiropractors are, to me, very funny, because what you're about to see is the Rebbe is going to allow it, the Rebbe is going to sometimes encourage it, and he always seems not to like it very much. And by the way, that has also been my experience with people who go to chiropractors. Like, yeah, I'll do it. I didn't like it. But the Rebbe seems to not be a fan of them. And we'll read the letter. You can make your own decisions, because I'm going to show you. This is our text-based class. You'll see the Rebbe's literal words. You can tell he's uncomfortable with the technique, but that he also is unwilling to say no to the technique, and as a matter of fact, in at least one case, recommends the technique while saying he's uncomfortable with the technique. So you really see some waffling on chiropractor. We'll read some of these letters together. These translations are not mine. These are translations that are pulled from these same letters in the book Healthy in Mind, Body, and Spirits. These translations will have fewer typos because they're not mine. It would seem, from the meager number of words that you write about the treatment, that it is a form of treatment that many doctors have begun to use of late, which is called chiropractic. Now, I must say, the Rebbe is not saying that this treatment he's talking about is chiropractic, and it might be OMM, meaning there's another form of medicine that was more recent that would probably make a little more sense in this context, called osteopathic manipulative medicine, which DOs practice, doctors of osteopathy. They have regular medical degrees, but also do alternative medicine, and their main form of alternative medicine is a body manipulation similar to what chiropractors do, called OMM, that actually has much better efficacy data than chiropractors do, especially for acute lower back pain. So I don't know if this is chiropractic. Could be that it was an OMM thing, which is similar on the surface, but the truth is there's probably better data on OMM than there is on a lot of chiropractor, and certainly DOs are trained better than chiropractors are for these particular kinds of manipulations. That is a side point. Point is, it's called chiropractic, which is to say that this form of treatment involves no paranormal or prohibited form of healing, etc. Did you notice what just happened? If you've been attending this year regularly, you know the Rebbe just touched on another one of our, pain points, if you'll allow the discussion for the point of chiropractic work. We need to make sure, especially with alternative medicine, that it doesn't violate idolatry and that it doesn't involve witchcraft. That concern is much less so when it comes to Western medicine, because Western doctors don't believe in anything. And if you don't believe in anything, that's its own special atheistic problem, but they're very unlikely to do witchcraft or magic or idol worship with allopathic medicine from the West. Whereas medicine that originates in the East very frequently has a religious overtone, and that must be accounted for. So the Rebbe says, I've looked into this one, and it doesn't seem this one. It doesn't seem the chiropractors are, witch doctors or trying to do Hinduism or, striking interesting poses. It seems that they're doing something that is medically based. That said, it doesn't violate one of our rules. I will note, I'm trying to collect them as we go. We have one rule back here, which is that success rate matters, efficacy. What we're getting over here is a second rule from the Rebbe, which is of course a halachic rule, that it cannot involve prohibited forms of healing. This is so that it is strictly a physiological form of healing, even according to those who practice chiropractic medicine and those physicians who disagree with them and are opposed to chiropractic medicine. Meaning, even their enemies don't say that they're witches, they just say they're wrong. And that's useful for us, because we don't care if the other side says they're wrong, we care if the other side says something forbidden is going on. And the Rebbe says, even the doctors who say these guys are quacks don't say that these guys are doing witchcraft or that they're doing idolatry, which is important for our discussion. They only dispute the efficacy of the form of treatment and nothing more. Accordingly, this should serve as an answer to the question whether it's permissible to continue going to the doctor who treated the boy with some success. Says the Rebbe, people are disputing whether there is success, which means we need to look into whether the treatment works. But as long as it doesn't involve idolatry, it's at least permitted. And now that we're saying that this boy who's gone to this chiropractor has seen success, that's good enough efficacy data for the Rebbe. The Rebbe seems to allow what we would call anecdotal evidence when assessing the value of an alternative medical treatment. It's worked for this boy, so keep it up. However, since it's not my calling to answer halachic questions, I always think it's funny when the Rebbe says that. It's not his calling. That doesn't mean he can't do it. It means he chooses not to do it. The Rebbe chooses to give the job of answering halachic questions to the Rabbanim of a town, not because he can't, but because he delegates. The Rebbe also could have been a shliach to Melbourne and chose to delegate. Right? This is a form of the Rebbe's delegation. He delegates psak to poskim. And that doesn't mean he can't do it. He doesn't do it though. He has shluchim. So since it's not my calling to answer halachic questions, particularly since there are so many elements here that I'm unaware of, they wrote to the Rebbe saying like, hey, we want to try something. You got to give him a lot more details to paskin. After obtaining a thorough knowledge about all the details regarding the treatment, they should therefore turn to a rabbi in their area who regularly rules on matters of Jewish law, meaning not just a pulpit rabbi, a rabbi who's used to ruling on difficult issues. Regarding the matter itself, whether it is permissible and whether it's a good idea to visit him again, since they have seen an improvement, then it is advisable that they continue to see him. You see this in a lot of the Rebbe's letters, that if an individual has had success with an individual treatment, even if the evidence for it is not very good, assuming it doesn't violate any of our red flag rules, the Rebbe will tell people to continue, which is a much lower bar than, for example, the one that we saw yesterday in the Yarchei, who wants everything to be certified, would like everything to have official documentation, and would like to see real efficacy data. I don't get a sense from the Rebbe's letters that he demands efficacy data or an FDA approval. I get a sense from the Rebbe's letters that number one, he wants to know, has it been working for you so far? And I guess even before that, it's really like number three. Number one, he wants to know, is it permitted? According to Jewish law, is idolatry involved? And number two, he wants to know, is it safe? And number three, he wants to know, has it worked for you? Which is a lower bar of efficacy. That does keep a lot of alternative medicine on the table in a way that maybe some poskim might be more strict about. The Rebbe seems to be significantly more permissive when it comes to alternative medicine that is safe, not idolatrous, and only somewhat effective. Because if it works for that person, why stop something that's permitted? I will remind you that it's part of a bigger shita, right? We also have betachon. So the Rebbe is saying, I believe, that if we have a kosher keli here, there's no reason not to give it a shot. If it's a kosher keli, that means it doesn't involve idolatry. That means it's been proven safe. It doesn't violate Jewish law. Once we're not violating Jewish law, could this be the keli that brings the refuah, that brings the healing? Why not? So if it started to work, keep it going. God's clearly using this shliach. I think that's the way the Rebbe is seeing this. I guess I didn't bring you a source for this one. That's a shame. Oh, it's just another chiropractor letter. Here we go. You are surely aware that there is a system of medicine, although many physicians regard it with disdain. See, why does the Rebbe have to say that? I'm telling you, he doesn't really like it. He pointed out in the previous letter, too, that a lot of physicians don't like this. He's pointing it out again, that there's a form of medicine, doctors hate this one simple trick, right? This is a form of medicine, doctors don't like it, whereby manipulating the vertebrae, done by those who are skilled in the art of manipulation, leads to improvement in many such situations as the one you mentioned. This is probably also osteopathic manipulative medicine. I don't know if he's talking about chiropractors. Although I must say that I'm not that enthusiastic about this form of medicine. The Rebbe shows his hand. I'm not a fan. This is not my favorite keli. If I had to pick a keli, I wouldn't pick this one. Experience has proved that it has been beneficial in many instances. The Rebbe goes, I don't like it, but it works sometimes. It is worth giving it a try. I believe the name of it is chiropractic. So, I don't know, how much more conflicted can a person be? The Rebbe says, I don't like it, I hear it works, give it a shot, here's what it's called. I don't see enthusiasm here, but I do see kosher keli, which is what we're looking for. We're looking to find out, is this a kosher keli? This is a letter that was originally written in English from the 20th of Nisan, 1983. The one below it is from the 26th of Tishrei, much, much earlier. That would be 1958, give or take. And I'll show you the original English letters. These are not translations. The Rebbe wrote these in English. Needless to say, medical science is not my special field, and I would not presume to offer any suggestions in a case which has been under your treatment. I will note that Rebbe does have a specialty. When he says biology is not his specialty, he means physics and engineering is his specialty. And in many letters that touch on physics and engineering, he pulls rank. There was a very famous conflict that I absolutely do not have time to talk about right now over whether Jews could ride on a boat on Shabbos. It was a ship, it was a cruise line, and this cruise line was running on Shabbos, and they were claiming you could run on this cruise line on Shabbos because the cruise was entirely automated and did not need any human input to keep it running. And the Rebbe has multiple letters where he writes back, I designed these ships. I know you can't do that. I know that this system doesn't exist. The Rebbe, in his area as an engineer, specifically worked at the Brooklyn shipyard. He was specifically involved in the technology on ships. The Rebbe Rebbe writes, as an expert in this field, I know that there is no technology that can have these ships running automatically. They're lying to you, somebody's doing something. So when the Rebbe has actual worldly expertise in a scientific field, he pulls rank. When the Rebbe only knows something because God reveals his secrets to the righteous, he doesn't pull rank. The Rebbe knows biology, God reveals his secrets to the righteous, but he doesn't pull rank if he doesn't have the education. The Rebbe says, I didn't study biology, so I'm not going to pull rank now. He will pull rank when it comes to electricity. The other classic case is regarding electricity itself. When people were saying that you could use a microphone on Shabbos, the Rebbe pulls rank and goes, I know how microphones work. I know you can't use one on Shabbos. The people saying you can don't know how microphones work. They're missing the engineering. So the Rebbe pulls rank when he has the credentials to do so. So he said, I wouldn't presume to offer any special suggestions in a case which has been under your treatment. You're the doctor, I'm not a biologist. However, inasmuch as you do invite me to make some suggestions, well, you asked, right? Well, you asked. As to a possible approach that has not been attempted, I would like to suggest on the basis of what I've heard about similar cases, that perhaps it is advisable to try the approach of such practitioners as a naturopath or an osteopath and the like. The Rebbe writes to an allopathic doctor, maybe we should try some alternative things. So the Rebbe is suggesting, this isn't the Rebbe hearing a suggestion for alternative medicine and saying, this is mutter, okay, don't worry about it. This is the Rebbe proposing an alternative method, really showing the Rebbe to make the statement, which some have made incorrectly, unfortunately, that the Rebbe is against alternative medicine, just doesn't match the letters. The Rebbe is against believing in a Keli, and the Rebbe is against alternative medicine that involves idolatry, and the Rebbe is against alternative medicine that makes no sense. We're going to see in a moment there are rules, but for alternative medical techniques, to say the Rebbe is against, or really for, is not fair. You can tell from these letters, the Rebbe is Keli hunting. He's looking for a proper shliach for a cure. So the Rebbe says, try an osteopath maybe, who have often been successful in treating patients with emphasis on natural healing of the human organism. I do not know exactly what methods were used, but I trust you would look into this approach, all the more so since there's no risk involved. At least for these, the Rebbe seems to feel for these particular approaches that the risk is minimal in that case. I will note on the Rebbe, depends on the naturopathy and depends on the chiropractor, right? You absolutely can hurt somebody with these procedures, but clearly the case the Rebbe was talking about was one of minimal to no risk. Another one in English, although it doesn't look like English. Look at that type. Remember when we used to have to read things like this all the time? I don't remember. I remember a world, not just you guys, I see some of you nodding, you remember a world where things were like that. I'm such a baby that, I don't mean age-wise, but that too. I mean in maturity, like mental maturity. I get frustrated when I have to read a book that isn't laser printed. I'm like, oh, remember those printings before they laser printed things? I tell you, I'm so, when I have to read like old shuvas that they haven't reprinted in laser printing, I get frustrated. So this is driving me crazy. But despite the fact that it says every word twice and I have to bend my head to see it, needless to say, it is not my intention to convey the idea that I leave no room at all for naturalistic method of treatment. There's the Rebbe saying it exclusively, saying it explicitly. The Rebbe wants us to know I am not saying no to natural forms of medicine. I'm not. My only intention is to exclude the extreme form of application of this method, as the best method is the combination of both in the proper ratio, which depends on each case on its merit. The Rebbe is saying there's a place for alternative medicine, there's a place for allopathic medicine. In most cases, there's room for both in the single treatment of a patient. Very extreme forms freak me out, and by the way, they should. And a middle road approach where I look at the case specifically and say, this is a plausible Keli for this particular situation. Sometimes this works with that. Not one shitta, we're pro this, we're anti that. But let's look at the patient, figure out what's best for them. Make a plausible Keli and trust in God, says the Rebbe, that's my shitta. Which means it would be inappropriate to say the Rebbe is for or against alternative medicine. It would be appropriate to say, ask which form, ask which treatment, ask which disease, and we'll see. So there's certainly some people doing alternative medicine right now who the Rebbe would say stop. And certainly some people doing allopathic medicine right now who the Rebbe would say switch. It really depends on the case, which is why a mashpia is so important and why a refi yadid is so important. Having a doctor as a friend, which is something we're about to discuss in a moment, becomes the keli for knowing which method to use. Because we're not expected to become doctors and become well-schooled in the different medical techniques. We're expected to trust in God. So I'll show you how we do that safely in just a moment. The Rebbe has a rule that is not his rule. It is in fact a Rambam in Perush HaMishnayos, and it is brought lehalacha in many places, but the Rebbe echoes it and brings it, as far as I'm concerned, lehalacha, that every medical approach, allopathic or alternative, must have a plausible mechanism of action. That does not mean it needs to be FDA approved. That does not mean that it needs excellent efficacy data. It does mean that if you can't explain plausibly how this would work using nature, then it's not for us. We don't allow magic cures even if they don't involve magic. If a practitioner says, I stare at people's faces and through love and desire I'm able to cure them, and they can't explain how love and desire cures anything, then that's not good enough. However, I'll give you an example of something where the mechanism is plausible, but not at all something that Western medicine or that anything in my field would be able to identify. Something that I gotta tell you, I don't believe exists. But it doesn't matter because it's a Keli, right? Let's talk about acupuncture. Acupuncture. No, acupuncture has no medical mechanism. That is, the idea of meridians or lines of power and energy running through the body that can be added or disrupted by a needle. There's no medical evidence of this at all. Not just no medical evidence of it working, there's no medical evidence of these lines existing. But the mechanism is plausible. They have purported that there's something running through the body that medicine can't find, and that putting a needle here will block that or open that. That doesn't make any sense to a medical doctor, and it doesn't have to. We're not looking for allopathic approval. We're looking for, can you explain yourself? Acupuncture can explain itself, and therefore it is not forbidden, at least not for that reason. We would have to look at whether it involves idolatry or whether it's dangerous, but this is not a problem for acupuncture because it's plausible. So that's what I mean by plausible. Doesn't have to pass scientific muster, just has to make some sense and say. And the Rebbe does rule out approaches that do not. For example, this is a very famous letter. Rabbi quotes this one quite often in response to there are always, especially in Crown Heights is full of health fads. And in response to a lot of health fads, Rabbi just pastes this letter. This is his go-to letter in response to health fads, which is, you better be able to explain it before we even talk about it. With regard to your question about using the services of Mrs. ... which is a very common last name in the Rebbe's letters. The whole family, big Lubavitcher family of ... generally. I don't know who they are. I don't know who their children are. It's a big Lubavitcher family. With regard to your question about using the service of Mrs. ... who heals without using any healing remedies at all, she has no technique. Inasmuch as the Torah has granted permission for the healer to heal, I don't understand why one should pursue unfathomable paths. The Rebbe is speaking gently here by saying he doesn't understand. I can show you a Lashon Rambam that says it simply is asur, that it's forbidden to use a form of medication that is unfathomable, because that itself is called a kind of witchcraft. If you can't explain yourself, you're a wizard, right? Doesn't mean it doesn't work. Doesn't mean if you can't explain yourself, you're not a doctor anymore. You're a magician, and if you're a magician, we don't go to magicians. Which brings me to my last letter. I told you we'd have a little bit of spare time. I think we're going to have time for technology. Last thing I want to show you is a piece of a sikha. And it's a piece of a sikha that is reflected in several places. But I brought my favorite little shtickle of it. But this is something that Rebbe repeats again and again and again. And I think it's something that our generation doesn't know enough about. Not, God forbid, to say anything negative about our generation, to say we're missing out on, in my opinion, the most powerful thing that the Rebbe put in these final days of Golus. I think people miss it again and again, and the Rebbe repeats again and again, here's where you can find the greatest blessings, and people ignore it. And I don't really understand why. So every time I talk, I try to talk about it. That's a big buildup. I better make good on that promise, right? I just promised you the world. The Rebbe says, well, let me give a little bit of background. Prior to the 1980s, if you had a question in medicine, somebody was, God forbid, sick, they'd write to the Rebbe and ask for advice. First of all, they'd ask for a bracha for a refuah shlema, because that's what you do by a tzaddik. You ask not to just tzaddikim. Rabbi Groner gave a shir yesterday about how every Jew has the power to give blessings. When a person's not well, they ask for a blessing from their friends, and from the righteous even more so, and the righteous give a blessing, and each of us give blessings to each other, and we say l'chaim, and one Jew prays for another, and we help each other. This is what a Jew does when they're sick. And it's still what a Jew does when they're sick. They still go to the tzaddik and ask for a bracha. In addition to that, they would ask the Rebbe for straight up medical advice. Should I go to this doctor or that doctor? Is it best to try this treatment or that treatment? And you've seen many of the letters that have resulted from this. And the Rebbe would answer, and the Rebbe would give a bracha, and people would get the best possible outcome. I can't tell you that they all got better. I can tell you that you never could get a better deal than asking the Rebbe for help. So they end up getting the best deal they could get. If they were destined not to live, not much you can do with that. But you can get the best deal you can get. That's the way to stack the deck in your favor. If somebody had a business proposition, they didn't know what to do in business, they would write to the Rebbe. Do I invest in this stock or that stock? Do I build this building or that building? Do I take this job or that job? And the Rebbe would answer, and that became a keli for success. And I can't tell you they were all successful, but I can tell you that they got the best deal they ever could have gotten. That is, the deck was stacked in their favor because they went to a tzaddik and asked for advice. And when they had a question in Avodas Hashem, this is the most clear-cut one, the one that everybody agrees are what tzaddikim are for. A question of how to daven, a question of where to learn in yeshiva, a question of perhaps who would be a good mate to marry, a question in Avodas Hashem or in styling their lives. They would go to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would give them advice and a bracha. And once again, I can't tell you it always worked out. I can tell you nobody ever got a better deal than that deal. And then in the 1980s, the Rebbe says, I have a better way for you to get all three of those things. I'll give you a bigger blessing if you follow the following instructions. Stop writing them to me. And the Rebbe says, I have taken the blessing for the entire Jewish people as a group, which is far greater than the blessing that's coming to any one individual. When we are united, we have incredible sources of blessing in our lives. So the Rebbe says, I've taken the blessing of the klal, of the entire population, and I have placed it in 3 places. And if you go to any of these 3 places, you will get a better blessing than you would if you came to me. Better than writing to me, better than visiting me. Not to say there aren't good reasons to relate to a Rebbe, but if you're looking just to get something out of it, there's now a better way than going to him, because he says how to do it. If you want the best bracha for refuah, you go to a Reif Yedid, a doctor who's a friend. The Rebbe says, consulting with a doctor who is a friend, that is a doctor who personally cares about your well-being and will put personal effort into helping you heal. Doctor does not only mean an MD, doctor means any medical professional who is credentialed. The Rebbe has placed a blessing greater than the one he would have given you personally in the question you ask to that doctor. You don't have to worry once you go to your Reif Yedid. Now, to be fair, the Rebbe sometimes says to use a second opinion and sometimes says a third opinion. There is a mini flow chart for how to deal with the medical establishment that is not complicated and that any mashpia, rabbi, or Reif Yedid would be happy to share with you, but it's very straightforward. A Jew goes through these motions, does what they're supposed to do, trusts in God, and they get the best deal they ever could have gotten, even better than they would have, by going to the Rebbe personally, because the Rebbe has placed his own personal bracha in the Reif Yedid. He extends that and says, I've done the same thing for Yedidim, Mivinim regarding business matters. You have a question about what to do in business, about what job to choose or what house to buy, anything involving finance, I have placed the blessing of the general population in a close friend of yours who's an expert in that particular field. Ask somebody who knows what they're talking about, who cares about you, and their answer will be my blessing, better than the one you would have gotten from me alone. And for somebody who has a question in Avodas Hashem, they want to know how to style their life or how to live their life as a Jew, go to a mashpia, aseh lecha rav, pick somebody who's a little older than you usually, a little smarter than you always, ideally who's living in the kind of life that you aspire to have, I would say 100% of the time, and with God's help answers the phone, and knows a little chassidus. Ask them for advice, and the advice they give you will be the greatest blessing you ever could have gotten, greater than the one you would have gotten from coming to me, which means that already in the 1980s, the Rebbe created a system where if you want a bracha from the Rebbe, there are people we go to. We have people for that. Many things are different before and after Gimel Tammuz, and a lot of things are exactly the same on a much deeper level. And one of the things that's exactly the same is that there is definitely no situation where you cannot get a blessing anymore. People I hear say all the time, I don't know where they're coming from with this, they'll say all the time, they'll say, I wish the Rebbe was in the physical body right now because then I could go to him and ask for advice on something. And I say, there's a lot of reasons to wish to have a tzaddik in a physical body, especially the Nasi Adar. That's not one of them. That's not one of them. If you want his blessing, all you have to do is go to one of the 3 people he assigned to be vehicles for his blessing. If all you're hoping to get is something from the Rebbe, you can get it without the Rebbe being in a physical body. That changes nothing. That changes nothing. Because already in the 80s, the Rebbe said, if you want to get my blessing, go to these 3 people. Which means that before we all pursue any kind of therapy, we want God's blessing. We want the Rebbe's blessing. We want the influence of spirituality. We want to make sure, going back to our original letter, we don't leave God's reshus, and that we're in God's domain the entire time that we're in the medical system, which means nowadays we go to a Reif Yedid, and that's all part and parcel. The Rebbe has put his personal blessing in the Reif Yedid. Going to the Reif Yedid, a doctor who's a friend, creates a keli for blessing. It fulfills the dictum of Shulchan Aruch, that doctors specifically were given permission to heal, and it ends up being exactly the spiritual vehicle for anybody to get the best possible outcome they ever could. Which means that whatever method you choose doesn't matter nearly as much as how you choose it. But pretty much all methods don't violate the basic tenets are on the table. Let me show you the basic tenets now that we've rounded them all up, and with that we'll conclude alternative medicine. We have a checklist, and I use this checklist when people call me. I told some of you this when we did the alternative medicine shir, the halacha one. I use this checklist. It's based on both the Rebbe and many poskim to try to figure out whether an alternative medical technique is okay for a chassid if they call me, okay for a Jew if they call me, okay for a Jew, okay for a Jew. Number 1, I need to know, is it free of idolatry or witchcraft? If it has idolatry or witchcraft, they can't do it. We're not allowed to even save our lives using idolatry. It's one of the big 3. So if it truly involves idolatry, then you can't do it. Now, there are some modern methods that are permitted because although they trace from idolatry, they don't involve the actual act of idolatry, and others involve the actual act of idolatry and off the table no matter what, which means investigation of the technique and its roots is required before making a decision about any alternative technique. Once again, very rarely do you have to worry about this with Western techniques, which is an advantage of Western techniques. I will say personally that in my personal opinion, if somebody is interested in alternative medicine and they want to use this approach and they want to make sure that they are safe and that they're not doing anything that will violate Jewish law and that they won't do things that will interact with each other inappropriately, I would suggest they find one of these doctors of osteopathy. At least that's what we call them in America, DOs, because they're classically trained on both. Somebody who's classically trained in Western medicine and in Eastern medicine is going to know when things interact negatively. They're clearly a Kali for both, and they're clearly someone who can help you navigate the two approaches in a safe and meaningful way. So I think it makes the most sense to go to a DO if somebody is interested in alternative medicine, but that doesn't preclude the other approaches when done properly. Number two, does the therapy have a plausible mechanism? Once again, that does not mean that it has efficacy data that would pass muster in any of my laboratories. I would love to gatekeep, but I can't. I have the Rebbe telling me I can't gatekeep, so I won't. If it makes sense that it would work, and it has some degree of a success rate, some record of success, then we can talk about it. So that's what we want to know. Does it have some record of success? Does it have some plausible mechanism? And is it free of idolatry and witchcraft? I didn't put on my checklist because it's obvious, but I will add, it must be safe. Meaning there cannot be a high mortality or morbidity rate from this treatment. But assuming we're dealing with something safe, and assuming that we're not dealing with a lethal condition that must be treated, otherwise most doctors say a person will die, which is also a possibility, for most cases this covers it. Most cases this covers it, and it also covers it in the Rebbe Shita. All right, that's alternative medicine. Thank you very much. Would you like to... I assume people have questions. What we could do is I could take your questions. We could just not do smartphones, which I don't know if people really wanted. We could just stay. I didn't realize we'd go 45 minutes. We made a share. So why don't we do a question or two, and we'll see if we have time for smartphones. I don't know how much. You didn't sign up for smartphones. Suffice to say, filter your phones and don't let your kids play with them. Yeah.
I just asking about energy healing.
Sure. Yeah. There's a few different kinds of energy healing. The question was about energy healing. There's a few different kinds. Some of them, without a doubt, violate rule number one. And some of them, without a doubt, do not. Which means you'd have to verify which form of energy healing is being used. Some forms of energy healing fall under this one over here. It's a plausible mechanism that science just doesn't recognize. Some of them involve invoking the names and ideas of foreign gods. So it really would make sense to clarify which form you're talking about. Do you have one offhand? I don't know them all offhand.
Kinesiology and emotion code.
I have a slide on emotion code. Would you like to see it?
Yes.
I'll show you the emotion code slide. All right. Kinesiology I haven't looked into, to be honest. My understanding is that it's much less problematic than emotion code. I'll say it to the mic. I haven't looked into it deeply, but my understanding is kinesiology is the less problematic of the two. Meaning the less linked to a Eastern technique or to an idolatrous practice. That's my understanding. But I haven't looked into it enough, so please don't take that seriously until send me a text or a WhatsApp and I'll look into it for you if you're actually doing it. Kinesiology I don't get asked about a lot in Crown Heights. Emotion code I get asked about every 4 minutes. Emotion code's incredibly popular. So popular I had to make a slide about it. That's how popular it is.
What is it?
I'll show you. Oh no, I was just going to talk around it and not tell you. I was just going to be for the two of us. I'm going to tell you. Okay, that up there is emotion code. Dr. Bradley Nelson. A boy named Brad. They're all named Brad. Okay, his name Brad Nelson. Bradley Nelson. He put together a book about how to release your trapped emotions for abundant health, love, and happiness. Sounds promising. I would like to release my emotions for abundant life, love, health, and was it love and health and happiness? Health, love, and happiness in that order. There are 3 major premises of the book. One is that you can release trapped emotions in different parts of the body. Number 2 is that muscle testing can access the body's subconscious knowledge. And number 3 is that magnets can release emotional energy. These are the 3 major tenets of the book. How do I know? Because so many people ask me about it, and I'm a rabbi, and rabbis have to find answers for people, that I had to read the thing. So I did go through it, and these are the 3 major points. I also did not enjoy this particular part of the exercise. You might know that rabbis on the Sanhedrin, and I'm not comparing myself to a rabbi on the Sanhedrin, but rabbis on the Sanhedrin needed to be knowledgeable about every form of idol worship. And the reason why is you cannot declare somebody an idolater in law if you don't know what idolaters do. Meaning they needed to know what violates the rule. So within that theory, I was forced, because of the people asking me the questions, to look into this and make sure it wasn't idolatry. And I found some idolatry. So I found some pretty big issues. I will say I did not find anything that would violate what we would call derech avidasa. Meaning I didn't find anything that would violate the strict laws of idolatry. Meaning nobody is getting put to death for doing the emotion code. I found many things that render it forbidden, however. Forbidden is not the same as idolatrous. It is, without a doubt, in my opinion, something that in its current form, the way it is in this book, a Jew cannot practice. Let me add 2 important notes. Number 1, Harav Ullman over in Sydney also looked into it. He determined the same thing I did. But he reached out to, I think they reached out to him, 2 practitioners of it who are frum, reached out to him, went through their methodology. He took out the idolatrous parts line by line. They asked him questions all the time, and he released a letter saying, these 2 individuals can practice the emotion code safely because these 2 individuals are under my halachic guidance. Like we talked about the other day, bacon bits with an OU on them. It sounds treif, but it's not. So if somebody has gone to a legitimate, competent Rav like Rav Oman, at that level, and that Rav has certified that their version of emotion code that they're practicing doesn't contain these problematic parts, then obviously permitted. Just like if you give me fake bacon with a good ashkacha, it's obviously permitted, even though it's called bacon. Let's not get stuck in our head. But the regular practice of emotion code without rabbinic supervision is without a doubt forbidden, as Rav Oman then clarified in a subsequent letter, because people took that original letter and pasted it on all of their websites, claiming he just likes emotion code. So he put out a subsequent letter clarifying that he has only given permission to these 2 individuals and does not know what others are practicing. So I will just run through them and I'll take your question. Actually, I don't need to run through them. You all know how to read. Everybody, if you're good with English, I put major sources for each of these ideas. In this case, I found an alternate source for the big ideas. Meaning, this without a doubt does not violate the strict laws of idolatry. It doesn't violate idolatry. We have a prohibition against playing with these sorts of things. And given that there are so many kalim for cure, and given that a Jew has so many choices for what vessel to use, for God to fill a blessing for a cure with, to choose one so halachically problematic is off the table. That's why I say it's forbidden. If there was literally nothing else that could work, we'd at least have to talk about it. But given that there are so many other comparable methods, similar methods, that don't involve these pain points, there's no reason to do this unless you want to do one of the versions that has been sanitized by a Rav. I see so many questions in the room. I think I've angered the emotion code practitioners. I'm just kidding. I know. Now, I saw yours first, and I'll take you in a second. I see you too. Yeah, I see you as well. Let me go to the back. Yeah. Yes.
And I am under the supervision of a group of Chabad practitioners who are under the direct supervision of Rabbi Ullman.
Then I am here to say that what you do is exactly mutter. Not even a question. And you ask the shilas. See, this is what I'm talking. This is what it looks like when it's done kosher. I hope people heard you. She says that she's a practitioner of emotion code with a group of Chabad practitioners of emotion code under the auspices of a Chabad Rav who they ask their shilas to make sure everything they're doing is mutter. That's how you make kosher bacon. That's how you make something that sounds prohibited but is permitted. So fantastic. And exactly what we're talking about. Exactly what we're talking about. Of course, as a healing modality. We don't advocate any of these things for recreational purposes. But as a healing modality, without a doubt, you've taken all the isser out of it. And every time you have a shaila, you ask a Rav. You couldn't do better. Yes?
Is a placebo effect, when it's maybe effective, would that pass, I think it was the middle point?
Would placebo effect count as a plausible mechanism? I sure think so. You guys want to know? I really shouldn't tell a group of people this. This is something you do not tell large groups of people who could benefit from a procedure. Would you like to know about a placebo that will never work for you once I tell you about it? I shouldn't tell you. I shouldn't tell you. Should we take a vote? Look, you know why it'll still work? Because you won't believe me. That's why it'll still work. You won't believe me. There was a study a couple years back done on acupuncture. And the study it's one of my favorite medical studies because it's a hilarious study. Scientists are objectively funny people sometimes. And this is a funny case. The doctors took a bunch of patients, bunch of acupuncturists. They had group number 1, they had a certified acupuncturist. They all had the same, I think they all had acute lower back pain with the same pain rating. So they all had the same condition. They had, I think it was acute lower back pain. They had one group get acupuncture from a certified acupuncturist in exactly the places that are supposed to help with this. That's group 1. Group 2, they had somebody say, we have very thin needles that you can't even feel, and pretend to put them in their back, and they didn't put anything in. The third case is the funniest. The third case, they had some random guy just put needles wherever he wanted. Wait. All 3 cases, 100% improvement. Which means that acupuncture is the greatest placebo in the medical literature. No placebo is as effective as acupuncture. It works 100% of the time, whether you do it or not. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, that's a great intervention. I love interventions that are. You want to talk about minimally invasive? I can tell you I acupunctured you and you're going to feel better. Absolutely. Now I know nobody wanted to hear that, but no. In the serious answer to your question, if it has no risk profile at all, then a placebo is not so much a drug as much as it is kind words or a kind idea, and that's always on the table. Meaning, I wouldn't call it refuah if it's exclusively placebo, and non-refuah is mutter automatically. That's my real answer to your question.
Would it mean if you have 1 and 3, if it's allowed and if it's
and it has a success rate, that this one in the middle is wiggly? Yeah, the one in the middle is wiggly. It's wiggly. The Rebbe very clearly says that if there's no plausible mechanism at all, it's off the table. But placebo is not just a plausible mechanism. We actively use it in regular allopathic medicine. We use placebo techniques all the time to help ease the pain of patients. People in pain medicine, the most classic placebo is the morphine clicker. You know the morphine clicker usually doesn't dispense morphine when you click it. It does, but it's very strictly limited to how much is healthy for the patient. We don't tell them you can't click. We say, here, click this whenever you want. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes you won't. We're not telling you how often. Usually we don't tell people how often because a lot of times they click, no morphine comes, and they do feel better. Pain is very much managed by placebo, and we do it on purpose. Meaning it's a legitimate healing technique using the brain's own pathways to make you not hurt. So I would not say that placebo is not a plausible mechanism. I would say placebo is one of the best studied mechanisms for pain management. So it really depends. Really, that's not meaning, right, but really, I can explain in neuroscience why placebo works. It has a better described mechanism than most of our therapies. I can explain to you how placebo eases pain with more detail than I can explain to you why most vaccines work. Right? I know I just made half of you hate me. I didn't mean to say vaccines work. I'm sorry. Ask your Rofi Adid, you'll get a refuah either way. I was giving an example. I know I saw half the room go, whoa. I'm not going to make it out of here. They're gonna beat me up in the alley. Somebody in this corner had a question for a while. Yes, I didn't forget about you. I just verbranged. Yeah.
Can you please comment on psychology and psychotherapy?
I could, but I did a whole share on it already. Were you here for the mental health one? Yeah, so it's available online. There's a video, and I absolutely could. There's a video online. You should definitely check it out. We did a whole unit just on mental health. Let me make a long story short for you, though, because it's worth. Because you asked B'Hashgacha Pratis, I should repeat it. B'Hashgacha Pratis is just the Rashi Prakim. Number one, we see mental health professionals as having the same status as doctors regarding the Rebbe's instructions about doctors. Meaning, if somebody is mentally unhealthy, they are expected to go to a mental health professional, and if somebody needs a Refa in that field, they should go to a Refi Yadid who is a mental health professional. Meaning, the Rebbe doesn't seem to distinguish, and I showed some letters proving this, between a body medical professional and a mind medical professional. And the Rebbe also doesn't seem to distinguish between medical disease and mental health disease, which is incredibly forward. That's the way that we view the world now, but it was not necessarily the way most scientists saw the world in the 60s and 70s, and the Rebbe was significantly ahead of the curve. The Rebbe has a letter where he says that a bad therapist is worse than no therapist in the same way that a bad surgeon is worse than no surgeon, and I think we can all agree. If you're going to let somebody mess around in your head and rattle around and move things and they don't know what they're doing, they can really mess you up. And a surgeon who doesn't know what they're doing can rattle around inside and really mess you up, which means it's very important to use the Refi Yadid system, the buddy system, to make sure that when you're seeking mental health help therapy, when you're seeking therapy, that you know who you're seeking therapy from, and that there's somebody who is good at what they do and has a success rate. The Rebbe also cautions to make sure that there's somebody who is either Jewish religious or sensitive to Jewish religious sensibilities, because there is a school of thought that religion is the reason why people are nuts, which I can't disagree with completely, but there's a school of, it's not the cause of mental illness, it's the cause of madness, and those are two completely different things. There's a school of thought that religion is the core problem. They will try to talk you out of connections with your family, your loved ones, and your religion, and not only is that ascientific, and not only is that ridiculous, and not only is that harmful, it of course ruins a Jewish soul, so you got to be careful about who you choose. There's a couple other points, but those are the big ones. Oh, one more is that the Rebbe seriously values the underutilized aspect of Hesach Hadas, that in concert with therapy and in concert with medication, whatever someone needs for their mental health, part of the exercise should be learning to distract oneself from the issue at hand and fill their mind with more productive ideas. Those are really, that's the big points on mental health. Yeah. Okay. That was the whole class. You didn't have to attend. That was it. Yeah.
You mentioned that basically the doctor doesn't heal, but he is the shliach.
That's right.
Does it matter if the doctor believes he's such a great doctor that it's his skill that is healing?
It might matter for the doctor, but it's not going to matter for you, and I'll tell you why it won't matter for you. The question was, if the doctor's a big egotist, does that hurt you? God won't let you get hurt by a doctor's ego. If you, with faith in God, go through the system the way you're supposed to, and in trust, go to a doctor, whether that doctor is egotistical, whether the doctor is right or wrong, whether the doctor is corrupt. And by the way, most doctors are not corrupt. I work with them all the time. The vast majority of people in this field are fantastic. In every field, there are bad eggs. So regardless of what doctor you end up with, if you go through the system the way that Rabbi describes it, through a Rabbi did, through a second opinion, if you walk through the system with trust in God, I guarantee you'll get the best outcome you ever could have gotten. Nobody can hurt you if you follow the rules any worse than the heavens plan on hurting you. I mean, that's a harsh way to say it. I would like to say it a little differently, but the point is that what's going to happen is going to happen to at some level, but you will never hurt your odds by following the rules. That's what I mean to say. If a Jew follows the code of Jewish law and the rules laid out by the Rebbe, nobody else can hurt them. which means you don't really have to worry about an egotistical doctor or an inept doctor as long as you're following the rules, which means you're going to a Rebbe Yadid, a doctor who's a friend. You're sometimes getting a second opinion when the Rebbe wants it. You're consulting with a Rav when a Rav needs to be consulted with. You're keeping the code of Jewish law. You're not violating idolatry. If you're keeping the rules the way you're supposed to, God won't let anybody hurt you. And if somebody, God forbid, gets hurt, that was the plan anyway in some cosmic sense, which is obviously any kind of tragedy we don't understand and we can't understand. I'm saying this not to explain tragedy, but to explain the other thing. The best deal you'll ever get is following the code of Jewish law. The best deal you'll ever get is listening to the instructions of the Rebbe regarding medicine. You don't really have to worry about people hurting you. You have to worry about you doing the right thing, the part you can control. That's the part I want to emphasize. The part you can control is the part you have to worry about. So yeah, an egotistical doctor can't hurt you. They can't hurt you. Yeah.
Yeah. If God is the healer, what does it matter that you go from one healing modality to another? I mean, it doesn't.
Great question. The question was that if God's the healer, why even switch modalities? Why pick modalities? I have two answers. Answer number one is that preference is given. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says it very much like this, that preference is given. That is, we are allowed, for example, God sends food to every person, right? God makes sure that all people have food. We say it after benching, it must be true. You get to choose what food you eat, right? I get to choose my food. That's part of just the spice of life is I get to choose the keli I choose for God's blessing. God puts blessing in the food and therefore it nourishes me, but I can choose to have meat or dairy today for lunch. That's one answer. One answer is as long as it's kosher, I get to choose my food. Answer number two, which I think is a little more compelling, is that God asks us to create a plausible keli for blessing. A plausible keli for blessing means that if someone heard your story, they wouldn't say, "Ooh, that's a miracle." They would go, "I can see how that worked." God asks us to set up situations so that when he does miracles, people could always go, "I see how that works." If a person has tried a certain method of healing for a very long time and seen no success, and suddenly they got cured, that would look very miraculous. If they switch modalities and that works, that'll look less miraculous. Our job is to create kelim that look minimally miraculous. So that's from Shar B'Tachan. So part of our job is to seek out other healing modalities or go to second opinions because it helps God hide in nature, not because we believe that's where the cure is coming from. Because it makes a more plausible keli. To use something a little bit less charged than medicine, if someone's working in a field for a very long time and making no money, you would tell them change your field. You wouldn't say change your field because you believe a job makes money. We're Jews. We know that God sends money regardless of the job. But the world wouldn't notice that, so you change the keli. Refresh the keli. Widen the keli. And by refreshing and widening the keli, it becomes more plausible for God to send a blessing, and therefore he hides better. So I lean toward approach number two, because I'm a big B'Tachan guy. But the truth is, approach number one is just as valid. You can say that every Jew is given preference to what modality they choose to use to nourish their bodies, what job they choose to make a keli for blessing, and what doctor they choose to go to for the keli for healing, as long as it doesn't violate the code of Jewish law. So, two answers. You've been waiting a while, I'm sorry.
So the way the hospital system is set up, you go to a GP, so you can pick a GP that cares about you, and then once you're in hospital, all these other doctors, depending on your situation, show up. You have no idea who they are. The GP no longer really has any control over you, at least that's the way it is here. And so, who has to be your friend? Just the GP?
I wouldn't even say the GP is the one who has to be the doctor who's the friend. The doctor who's the friend can be outside the system completely, and they can be the one who helps you choose the GP. A doctor who's a friend is a medical professional who's going to answer your call in the middle of the night and is going to stay up late worrying about you. That's what they are. I don't know that everybody's GP is that, although it'd be nice if they were. Everybody, thank God, in the Jewish community has a doctor who's a friend. Most of us has a doctor who's like a brother. I mean, we're all, who here is not related to a doctor? Are you kidding me? So you have a doctor who cares about you a lot, and they might have a specialty. The point isn't that they know what they're talking about in your field. The point is that they help you navigate the system of people who do. So you want a Refi Yadid who will send you to a good GP, and have a Refi Yadid who will notice that you've been shuttled through the system to a specialist that they don't like and might switch your hospital. We want a Refi Yadid who is going to act as a patient advocate, to use the secular word, not so much as an actual practicing doctor. The patient advocate Refi Yadid sends you to the doctor who actually treats you. It's okay if your Refi Yadid never treats you. Your Refi Yadid's job is to know the system well enough to help you navigate it. Patient advocacy. Which once again, it's the Rebbe's big idea. He put the blessing in it, and I can't take away from that. But when the Rebbe said this, no one was talking this way, and nowadays everybody says that the best outcomes for patients come from personal patient advocates. It turns out all of the Rebbe's big ideas are ultimately substantiated by good medical evidence and science if you give him long enough. And I will add that if you have anything you've ever heard or seen from the Rebbe that you're suspicious about because science has not yet backed it up, give them 5 minutes. Every day a new study comes out and proves the Rebbe right about something he said 30 years ago. So yeah, patient advocacy is something the Rebbe pushed in the 80s. No one was pushing it in the 80s. Now it's mandatory. Yeah, go figure. I think this is probably our last one. Oh yeah, we're over time. This is going to have to be our last one.
Does this system of the checklist work for preventive medicine like vaccine?
Preventative medicine is going to have a completely different checklist.
Okay.
for a couple reasons. First of all, some preventative medicine entails risk, and so we're going to have to ask safety questions first. And second of all, preventative medicine will also have a lower bar in that it doesn't necessarily have to have a plausible mechanism to be preventative. For example, if you can't explain to me how eating my vegetables is going to make me healthy, I can still eat vegetables. It's not off the table because there's no possible harm. So preventative medicine, we're going to first ask, is there a safety efficacy issue at the beginning? And second of all, we're going to be more strict on safety and less strict on plausibility. So it's a different flow chart. It is. Yeah. Okay. Thanks everybody so much. I am coming back in an hour for the next year. I need to run to go prepare it, so please don't chase me into the hallway today, although I've loved our conversations. I need to make these slides.